Irresistible and creamy mushroom risotto. Risotto is a bit of a labor of love, and it is worth every single second and every single stir of the rice. You really can't cut corners if you want to make a great restaurant quality risotto. I'm using portobello mushrooms in this recipe, and I'm cutting them thinly because I prefer thin mushroom pieces, but you could cut yours however thick you like. I'm also adding a small amount of mixed dried mushrooms in this dish. You could leave it out, but dried mushrooms definitely elevate the umami in this dish. Morels, porcinis, chanterelles, and even oyster mushrooms are other great options for risotto. To add a touch of sweetness, I'm including a small amount of sun-dried tomatoes chopped. We start by cooking our mushrooms. I've heated some butter in my large saucepan. The fresh mushrooms go in and cook until softened. I throw in the drained, dried mushrooms and the sun-dried tomatoes. While the mushrooms are finishing, I'm going to finely chop my aromatics. I'm using 2 shallots and 2 garlic cloves. Shallots aren't required. A person could also use a small yellow onion. For this sauté, I'm using extra virgin olive oil. The shallots and garlic get sautéed, and then the rice goes in for toasting. For risotto, we are using arborio rice. This is the industry standard because it is starchy and becomes very creamy. However, there are a couple other types of short grain rice that can be used. An important note, the rice should not be rinsed prior to cooking. Rinsing removes much of the starch, and we need the starch to create a creamy risotto. The rice sautés for about 2 to 3 minutes until it begins to become translucent. This is an important step that should not be skipped. One of the herbs I'm using in this dish is thyme. I love the flavor of thyme in a risotto, especially with the mushrooms. I'm adding 4 sprigs of fresh thyme. And the wine goes in. I prefer a dry white such as a Pinot Grigio or Sauvignon Blanc. If you choose not to use wine, just replace with more broth. The rice cooks in the wine until all of the wine is absorbed. We want a slow simmer here. My temperature is medium-low. Stirring is an important part of making the risotto creamy. While stirring every second of the cook time is not required, stirring frequently is very important. Once the wine has been fully absorbed, I start ladling the broth. I am using a vegetable broth that I made. You can use any broth of your choosing. I do recommend a broth with little to no sodium. You'll want to control the sodium with a dish like risotto. I would personally use the highest quality broth that I could for risotto. Much of the flavor of the risotto comes from the broth. If you're interested in making my broth that uses kitchen scraps, I'll post a link below. The broth is kept hot so that it does not lower the temperature of the rice. And I use 6.5 to 7 cups of broth for about 1.5 cups of rice. So here's the steps for the next 30 to 40 minutes. Pour in 1 ladle of broth, continue to simmer until all of the broth is absorbed, while also stirring quite frequently, and repeat. And repeat. And repeat. Cooking this dish at a higher temperature, adding more broth at a time, stirring less frequently, will result in a risotto that is not fantastic. I really wouldn't skip any of the steps that I use. You'll notice as you cook the risotto that the rice absorbs a lot of broth quickly at first and then begins to absorb the broth at a slower rate the longer it cooks. While the dish finishes, I'm going to grate some vegan parmesan and chop some parsley. I also happen to have fresh basil, so I did a quick chiffonade. I don't usually add basil to my risotto, but it's a fantastic addition. I'm removing the thyme sprigs from the pan, and I decided that I could use a touch more creaminess, so I'm going in with 1 more ladle of broth. At the 30-minute mark, I taste the risotto to see if it has cooked correctly. It should be al dente or firm, but not crunchy or mushy, and it should be creamy. And then I add salt. After adjusting the seasoning, the mushrooms and sun-dried tomatoes go in and get heated through. Now we'll add the Parmesan cheese, parsley, basil, and some butter. The butter makes the risotto creamier, richer, and gives a shiny finish. A few toppings on each dish finishes the plate. I made a balsamic glaze with just 2 cups of balsamic vinegar and a half cup of brown sugar simmered on low for about 30 minutes. A drizzle of truffle oil would be lovely as well. Check out my channel for more delicious vegan recipes.